Well, hello, and thank you for taking the time to join us again in the Map Room, the podcast where we hope that if we can help you understand your business a little bit better, then you can achieve a lot more. So today I wanted to talk about one of the areas that so many clients see as their top issue or issues. And when we say to clients, can you talk us through your top 3 issues? I think probably the last 12 to 18 months, what we've heard is pipeline, pipeline, and pipeline. So we're going to address that today. I often then say to clients, or ask them the question, so where do you get your best leads from? And I would say the significant majority of the time, they will say referrals. And I did a little bit of research and I put the question into Google, and Google came back as the top lead source for small businesses was referrals and partnerships. Asking existing loyal customers for referrals is highly effective. But it made me think, and it made me question, are your best leads really referrals? What is a referral and when is it not a referral? And maybe is it an introduction rather than a referral? So to answer those questions today, I'm delighted to welcome into the Map Room our subject matter experts for today, and that's Steve and Claire from As the Crow Flies. Steve, Claire, how are you? And thank you for giving your time up for the Map Room today.
No problem. I'm very well. Thanks, Stuart. Lovely to see you again.
Hello, Stuart. All good, thanks. Yeah, glad to be here.
So to put some context into this, I wanted to explain really why I wanted Steve and Claire into the Map Room, which is they did a fantastic keynote presentation at the Bulletproof event recently, and it was about this subject. And it really, a lot of things they said really resonated with me, which I hope we'll get into the sort of meat of it today. But also, we always say, or I always say when I started this now 4 years ago, we didn't want theorists. We wanted people who'd had the real experience and had the battle scars. And something that Steve opened up his presentation with last week really made me realise why it was yourselves I wanted in as the experts today. And that was, Steve casually threw to the room that this knowledge and experience was the result of many expensive mistakes. So that's really important. And I think it's important that we share the things that we've learnt, the good as well as the bad. You said something else as well, which I'm going to put right out there at the start. And I watched the room, and there was a few sort of drop the mic moments, which is really positive, which was agencies are excited by pitching for work they've already lost. So I think that's really resonates with people. So let's start maybe with going back to my question at the top, when is a referral not a referral? So
Claire, you can take that.
Sure. So there's a massive difference between, or there's 2 ways in which people would describe a referral. One of them's wrong, one of them's right. Now, what a referral actually is a proactive, intentional piece of new business activity. So in its simplest form, it is, I have identified a referee who sits between me and a prospect that I deem to be high value to me, part of my ideal client profile, or someone me and my agency or business would love to work with. But a referee sits in the middle. They own that relationship, and I'm looking to take over that relationship from that referee. So I follow an intentional series of steps in order to do that. That is a referral. So it's a system at play, and there's intent from your part. So you've taken control and you've gone through those steps. What a referral isn't, that a lot of people would like to badge it as a referral, is when it comes in. Now, I call it word of mouth, right? But it's passive. It's an passive introduction. Now, we all love these because it means we're doing something right in the world, right? You know, you do good work, and ultimately you're nice people, things come back at you, and that we would deem that to be a very organic thing. So that's word of mouth doing its job. Someone was somewhere in a conversation and they decided to advocate for you. Brilliant. That's great. We all want those to be happening. The thing about it is we are out of control of it. It's unpredictable, and it doesn't always come in quite the right shape and size or the right area of the agency. It's typical, isn't it? It's like, we've got an area of the agency that's really under capacity, and actually the referral that hits us, or the introduction that hits us, I should say, is the one in the part of the business where we just can't service it at the moment. So, or it comes in and it's the shape's slightly off, or the prospect itself isn't quite right for us, but because someone we know or we care about has given us that introduction, we feel like we need to see it through. There can be a little bit of trouble around introductions. Now, not always, and everyone can point to a story of a brilliant, brilliant introduction that has changed the shape of the agency, and we love those happening. But the most important thing is it is down to serendipity. What Steve and I do is we help shift businesses into systems. So get proactive rather than sitting only in passive.
Interesting. So I think what you're saying there and the sort of takeaway is what most people, myself included, historically would have said was a referral is essentially an introduction. So what you're
Yeah.
saying is a referral is a proactive action that you take. You identify something and you act upon it. It is not a random introduction, a random knock on the door, which I think is probably when we speak to most clients and they say, oh, we won these amazing projects last year through referrals. They are, in your definition, introductions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And Claire's point, Stuart, absolutely everyone will be able to point towards a brilliant piece of new business that has happened that way, right? We're not saying it isn't even been earned. If you've been doing a good job of getting your agency out there visible through networking or whatever, but the point is, as Claire says, you're just not in control of them.
What I want to do maybe is just go back on something that you said at the outset there, Claire, which is your terminology of if you're going to take a decision to act on something proactively, then you talk about this concept of targeting those. I'm going to use the phrase people in a second, but you said something at the start here, which was the concept of referees and prospects and referrals. So
Yeah.
we all assume when we use the word prospects, we know what we mean. But in terms of you and your systems and programs, just explain for everybody listening, break those down so everyone's really clear on what you mean by those different identities.
Yeah, sure. So, a referee is someone that you have a relationship with, and most importantly, there is trust between you and that referee. Because actually, what a referral is, it's trading off the inherited trust that becomes part of that introduction. So when that referee introduces you to the prospect, that inherited trust is part of that. So you immediately are on the front foot with the prospect. So the referee is the person that you have the relationship with, where the trust already exists, and they hold a relationship with the prospect that you want to have a meaningful conversation with. A prospect is ultimately someone that the business or the agency wants to work with. Now, in an ideal world, all prospects fit within what we would call an ideal client profile or an ICP. Now, it doesn't always work that way. And actually, the genius thing about referrals is it is very, very, very low to zero cost of acquisition. Right. So depending on any investment you might make later down the line, taking people out for dinner, incentives, stuff like that. If you remove that from the equation at the moment, as a outreach channel, it is very, very low cost of acquisition.
I just want to butt in there, if I might, Claire, and ask the question. When you say there about the referee and you talk about the existence of trust, does that mean, does a referee have to be an existing client of your business, or can it be just somebody who knows you, knows what you do, but may never have purchased your products or services in the past?
Yeah, so well, there's three types of referees. There's sort of three camps they sit in. The first one is client, right? And by far and away, they are your most valuable referees simply because they work with you already and they don't have to say nice things about you, right? So if someone is going through the process of going peer to peer for a recommendation, of which we know 84% of buyers do that, and they are someone that already works with you and they say something good about you, then that sort of is the pinnacle of a referral. So clients is the first camp. The second one is personal contacts. So anyone of yourself or within your agency, you'll all have sort of personal and professional contacts. There's always someone with a neighbor that works at a brand that you really want to get into. If you start joining the dots properly, it's crazy to see how many of these contacts come out of people's little black book that they hold personally that they didn't really know had value in it. So personal contacts is the second camp. And then the third camp is partners of the agency. And when I say partners, and I normally call them strategic partners in referrals, and the reason why I do that is because if you have a partner of the business where there is more than about 5 or 10% crossover in service, they probably aren't going to be your best referee. And the reason being is because they'll probably find a way to keep the revenue themselves at the moment. So if you've got a media agency and a creative agency that are in theory they're partners, but actually sometimes the media agency buys creative resource in, if a job comes their way, they may not pass it to you depending on what's happening with their cash flow and their pipeline at the moment, right? So a strategic partner, in an ideal world, there is very minimal or zero crossover. So you might have a digital agency and a hosting company, right? They share an ideal client profile, i.e., they're both working with the same types of businesses, but they do not offer the same service.
Yeah.
That is a great strategic partnership when it comes down to referees.
The bit that's sort of ringing out to me when we discussed this and when I listened intently to your keynote presentation is that, you said on the day, this is not a piece of software. This is not an off-the-shelf fix, so to speak. This is a system that you can help people understand and train them that might be most appropriate for their business. But it's something that's proactive. So
Yeah.
can you, in the same way that you're saying about maybe develop an ideal client profile or persona, and we'll come back to that. I want to go deeper into that later. But is a sensible step to say to somebody, okay, maybe before you start your own referral program, do you need to create, if you don't have it, or do you need to identify or create then this list of strategic partners?
Yeah. So for us, and this kind of links to the ideal client profile. I mean, sure, you've referred to it on other podcast episodes, right, Stuart? The businesses that really have some discipline around targeting brands that are their ideal client profile are twice as fast to high growth, twice as fast to higher levels of profitability. So, first, I would say really getting clear on the ideal client profile. And that can include, very often people stop at just a vertical or something like that. Actually, who are the 20 businesses we'd like to have a serious conversation with in the next year? That would be actually putting some names up on the board often forces people to ask why.
Yeah.
Why should these guys really give a crap about having a conversation with us? From then you can work back to, identifying your referees. So think about the ideal client profile first, then look for the referees that can introduce us into those kind of businesses. If we've not got referees that do get it into those 20 or so businesses, okay, but that's a really good starting point, because then we can look for lookalike businesses that they can put us into. But the first point of all, there's far too many agencies out there that are, slapping themselves on the back for winning clients that get them good billing, but ultimately don't drive profit. So you're absolutely right. It's to identify the referees, but let's start by identifying the ideal client profile.
And I think what you're saying there is as well, there's two potential ways of looking at this ideal client profile, isn't there? There's one which is who is your ideal client if you took your clients today?
Mhm.
And there's maybe the more ambitious side of it that you've said there, which is, okay, who are the 20 brands we would like to be talking to? Now, they may be, you mentioned verticals earlier, Claire. It may be we're brilliant in transport and infrastructure, so we'll find somebody else. Or it might be we want to break into a completely new sector and we haven't got any clients in that sector. So I can see there the more sort of ambitious thing is to say, okay, if we had a desire to break into this sector, how do we do that? And that's probably where your partnerships potentially would form part of that referee globe, because you haven't maybe got a client in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's a really good point that you make, right? Because often when we speak with founders and you ask them about their ideal client profile, very often that is colored by some aspiration.
Yeah.
Right. So firstly, let's put a financial lens on it, right? So get the Mac guys around the table into the room. Let's have a look at almost a historical ideal client profile.
Yep.
Who's been with us for a long time, we've billed consistently, and we drive the right kind of profit. Yeah, because actually that is a very strong signal we're delivering some distinctive value for us, right? They've not gone elsewhere. So there's a historical look. But to your point, there's, if we are looking to scale the agency, or maybe we've lost a kind of couple of clients, is that historical ICP sustainable for our targets and our ambitions? So what you're actually doing there is that's our historical ICP. This is the one you believe is your ICP, but then we're also looking for the future. What is our stretch ideal client profile? And to your point there, if actually we deem our historical one that is potentially not got the ambition that we need, then how are we going to use those 3 different pools of referee that Claire talks about to help us transition? And that is really important.
Let's use Matt for an example. So we specialize in agencies, but we've spoken before about should we extend to other professional services, because most of our clients will bill on some kind of time-related delivery basis. So you could say, well, do you know what? Lawyers are like that, for example. Now, if we were to go and try and pitch to a lawyer, we've got no trust value proposition to fall back on. And I think what I see a lot with agencies is they'll do that ambition. They'll all want to work with Coca-Cola or whatever the logo is. And they wonder then why, and it might be your point about they then get excited about pitching for work they've already lost. They don't have let's just use the phrase, the creds in this sector. And actually, if they thought about it a bit more, the use of a referee in that instance might be the bridge to that new sector, because they can't say, here's the other 10 legal firms I've dealt with. But in the same way that we've just gone through our own transition to employee ownership, we will use the lawyers, and lawyers will then verify for us as, ironically, their client. But it's interesting. I can see a role for the referee being your, I don't know if springboard's the right phrase, but your springboard into an industry where because your ideal client portfolio going forward might be 180 degrees away from what your clients are today.
Yeah. And you know what? We'll give you a real life example of as the crow flies. So Steve and I's background is agencies. We both worked in agencies for 20 years each. And in the last 6 months, we've transitioned our referrals training program into professional services. Now, how did we do that? Well, we stopped and we looked at who are our referees and who has got a very credible relationship with someone in a very senior position within the legal vertical. And we then utilised a connection point, which we spoke a lot about at Bulletproof, a connection point, which is a moment in which you can take over the relationship with the prospect from the referee. So we utilised a connection point where we approached a senior partner in a law firm, utilising the referee. We approached them, and our connection point of choice was, can we co-create a referrals product for the legal sector with you? And immediately we're off and running, and you get your first case study, and then you look to leverage that relationship to generate new referrals. So absolutely, the springboard, the bridge, whatever you want to call it, it's the most authoritative way of you to translate a current product or service line into a new area, whether that be a new audience in terms of life stage of business, or whether that be a new vertical. So it's a surefire way of ensuring that first step you take is going to be an effective one, rather than you look like you're taking a punt on a new area or audience.
That makes a lot of sense to me. So it's almost find your referees where you don't have a case study would be one way I would internalize that in my mind. We've spoken quite a bit there about what this can be, and we started off by saying, when is a referral not a referral? One of the questions I like to ask guests on here very often is, where today do you see people getting it wrong? So what misconceptions do you come across when someone says to you, oh yeah, of course, we get all our business from referrals, and you're thinking they're probably on introductions, but help me understand and help everyone listening. What are the misconceptions? We get referrals. We're brilliant at referrals. What would they be missing?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think it's It's interesting, isn't it, how our brains only remember the really good introductions that sort of drop, right? And actually, our experience speaking with founders is we tend to forget the ones that have actually really drained our time and really drained, ultimately our billing hours. But I would say that conflating the introduction with the referral is the key, because when you get into it, we spoke with the founder in the last few weeks who was said, sat around the table, I mean, put some pretty gutsy new business targets up on for the new financial year.
Everybody does at budget time, Steve. Then it soon backtracks when you start doing
Exactly.
quarterly reviews.
We can't sit around here and not seem ridiculously ambitious, right? We've got to throw some numbers around. But he confided in us that, because their introductions rather than a system of referrals, wasn't really have any real confidence that whether those what were serendipitous introductions are going to appear this year, right? And that then forces you into, you get to month 3 or 4 and all of a sudden those kind of things aren't coming in. That forces agencies into what are pretty expensive knee-jerk reactions, right? There are no shortage. I think we've had a conversation before, Stuart, of people promising you 15 to 20 meetings a month. Well, what kind of meetings are those? And, do you really want to be filling your hours with 15, 20 meetings of often poorly qualified meetings? So I would say that. And as a second point is thinking that referrals are only the domain of the senior leadership team. And this is a really, a bit of a nuanced point, right? We are not saying that you want to turn everyone in your business to the ability to speak to a referee, run a connection point, and then transition that into a sales conversation and sign a new piece of business, right? A junior designer is not going to do that whole piece. But absolutely what they can do, to Claire's point before about you'd be amazed at who are the neighbours or who's the auntie of this and that piece, they can be encouraged to play even a small contribution into that system. The difference in terms of the number of qualified conversations that come into the business, when you amplify that across the whole agency rather than 2 or 3 senior teams, is remarkable. But that is I suppose the misconception. It's just, oh, well, only the people who've been around, the dinosaurs like me, have been around it.
Found hustle or whatever the phrase is. Yeah,
exactly. Whereas, the truth is that connection that with a prospect can come from anyone within your agency.
One of the agencies that I was involved with, we had a particular strategic client, and it was really interesting that what we found was over the years, what we would have described back in the day as referrals was exactly what you said there, Steve, is actually people who were involved in the delivery built up a relationship with, let's just use the phrase, you designer supplier builds up a relationship with designer or buyer in the client, and then they move and they go, and because of things like LinkedIn these days, those relationships are there. And ironically, some of the best, I would now, understanding your system better, refer to them as introductions and say, I can't get referrals out of my mind. Describe them. I would now understand them to be introductions, but some of the best introductions we got was when people and developers would worked on a project and said, oh, do you remember we did that build for so-and-so? Well, Kenny's now a freelancer, or he's moved on to so-and-so and he's asked him to do this. In fact, we were talking to a map client only last week where that's exactly happened. Someone from one of their key clients has moved, and although it's a junior position, has gone, oh, we used to buy our services in this space from this company. So it is that ability, isn't it, to I suppose not be snobbish about how you build your referrals and your networks and everything else. And ironically, it's probably easier for people that maybe outside of that senior leadership team to have those conversations, because there are reasons why senior people appear to be anyway more guarded, etc.
Yeah, I think there's some authenticity to, like you say, if you've got a developer that's worked on an account and they've spotted an opportunity because they've heard something in a meeting or whatever it is, actually there's a bit of an authenticity to their relationship with their connection, right? So sometimes you might have to work a little bit harder to then move up the ranks, but actually as an agency owner, I'd far rather know about that opportunity and us figure out if there is potential in it than that person to sit on it because actually they think I'm going to push them to try and do the sale themselves. And
Mm.
Steve and I always talk to agencies about just leveling the playing field and just having those really open conversations where no idea is a bad idea. And it's just who do you know where you think there might just be a seed of potential, and then let us help you decide whether we're going to take that forward in some way. And if we are, what bit do you feel comfortable doing, and at what point shall we take it over? Because not everyone is comfortable in that sales part of that
Yes.
process, and that's fine, right? Actually, all we're looking for is contribution here. We're not looking for end to end sort of accountability.
When we talk about that and sort of people's role in this and people's comfort levels, um, you really made me sit up and listen last week when you spoke about this concept of what you describe as identity. So what
Mhm.
I would have seen in the past as objections or obstacles with people, I think at the time you were actually talking about going back to some work you did in the legal sector, but help people understand this purpose of identity, because I think this really is the nub of why people will often, as we say, it might be a tick in a box at a performance review, but there is a fear about acting on it. Help people understand that, because that really circled the square for me.
Okay. Yeah. Well, very often we have founders or senior management say to us, we need our team to become more commercial. Or we need people to be thinking more commercially. And actually, that is the wrong question to be starting with. Really, what is driving that sort of box ticking appraisal, as you described, Stuart, and I've sat through so many of those appraisals over the years where people have sort of said they'll do something and then really done the bare kind of minimum, is an identity issue for us. And if it doesn't care, our system's pretty bloody good because we made all those errors, but I don't care how good the system is. I don't care how good the playbook is, how good the incentive or indeed the reprimand. If you do not address the identity issue with teams, it ain't going to work. You'll get little flurries of activity, poorly executed, hit and miss, and then something else will come in and take attention away.
But explain what you mean by that then, Steve. So
Yeah.
when you say identity in this scenario, help people understand what you mean by that.
Sure. Okay. So ultimately, most people's idea of doing sales in inverted commas is, I'll probably show my age a little bit here, but we refer to a bulletproof Swiss Tony, that fast show car salesman, essentially morally dubious, sort of low intelligence, grifter kind of
Low
person.
integrity.
And that is the archetype that people still hold in their heads. And actually, we would do a process in our kind of trainees just to help teams realize they actually do sales. Not only that, they enjoy certain parts of it. So if you talk to them about pitching, many of them really enjoy that kind of process. So it's actually, you just begin to loosen those kind of feelings around identity of, oh, it's not actually that I don't do sales. But what underpins a lot of that is what they're meaning there is when they're pitching, they're comfortable responding to a brief. Now,
Yeah.
why is, because it's actually reflecting back the positive self-image they have in their heads as, I'm an expert, I'm an intelligent, experienced person in marketing strategy or coding or whatever else it is. In pitching, we're being asked for our opinion. We go into a pitch as a group. You've got that security in a group. We get a brief, maybe if we're lucky, a good sort of 6 to 8 weeks beforehand. We get time to, consider, respond, and rehearse. Whereas actually, their perception of what the proactive referrals thing is, I'm going to have to think on my feet. There isn't a brief there. What am I going to say? What am I going to be asked? Might they make me look stupid? So the identity issue is really important. What you've got to do is help them understand that you don't have to be you don't become a Swiss Tony if you're actually asking for a referral. And to Claire's point, which I'm sure we come on to talk about, creating connection points where we're giving value rather than apologetically asking to come along and show them a case study or something like that. That's really key.
Let's come back on, because you mentioned connection points before. I want to part that for a second. So I just want to
Yeah.
be clear that we've explained what we mean here by identity. So what you're saying there is how people, the role that they see of themselves present in the organization, and the role in what they see as the sales process. So, one of the things that we did in the last agency I had was got to a point where we said, we are no longer pitching. Now, that did mean building what I would now call introduction networks, not as robust as your system. But that was because, as you say, people do get carried away and get really busy and love having lots of time spent on creating this creds deck, having creative ideas, go and pitch, and nobody's paying for anything at this point in time because pitching can be a very, very expensive waste of agency's time. And that's maybe a conversation another day. But what you're saying there is that, so the team, and I can think now the team that we had, that ironically, there were members of staff who used to be insulted if they were not consulted on the pitch. But ask them to ask for that order, and they don't. The designers don't do that. The creatives don't do that because there's a perception of conflict. I've always said everybody is selling all the time, even if it's in their delivery, even if it's in the way in which your credit controllers seek payment. Everybody is selling because they are either adding to your trust and your value proposition, or they're taking away from it. But what we're saying here is helping people understand where they're comfortable, I think is what you're saying, Steve, and then finding how that can be used to build this system up. So you're not saying, okay, Frederick, you need to get me introduction to your Uncle Ernie. What you're saying is, how do we do that, etc. So that's the bit on identity I wanted to be clear on, because that really made me realize where these kind of things, when I've tried to do it in the past, have fallen down. Let's go on to this next point on connection points, because before I saw you speak, I would have assumed a connection point was the referee. I would have assumed the connection point was the person that I believe is that gateway, that bridge. So again, so people understand exactly what it is you're saying is required, what is a connection point for As the Crow Flies?
In our terminology, a connection point is the moment in which you overtake that relationship. And actually, the connection point is the most fun bit of the referral process when you think about it as, how do we activate a referral system within our agency? The connection point is the bit where you can creatively brainstorm together, right? And talking about identity, we hear so many agency founders and leaders say to us, well, I can't really bring those people into this because they just say, I work in a creative agency to be creative. I don't want to get dragged into a binary sales process, right? Actually, this is the bit where you can get a cross section of the agency together in a room to brainstorm. Okay, this piece of insight that we own that is really valuable to these prospects, how could we bring that to life in the form of a connection point? Is it the theme of a private dinner? Is it a webinar? Is it a product that we want to create? And actually, the connection point is we can co-create it with 5 different prospects. And that gets us in the room, talking to them, working with them. Before we've even started to try and work with them, we're already collaborating in some way, to use that example that I use for us into legal. So a connection point can come in lots of different forms. It can be lower effort or higher effort. And actually, often we advise that based on the capacity within your agency right now, what is the right thing to do so that potential prospect doesn't sort of pass us by. So if we've got a pool of prospects where we're proactively putting a connection point together, give yourself the breathing space to design the right connection point, the right door opener product that sails really neatly off the back of it, and think about when have you got the capacity to either run that event or the showcase you're going to do, or go and interview them as part of outreach piece. Whatever the connection point ends up being, make sure you've got the capacity to do it. So if there's no time limit, if there's no deadline, take your time. If actually there's a prospect or a pool of prospects that may pass you by, go quicker, think smaller. What have we got the capacity to do right now that ensures we are now in their orbit and we're able to leverage that trust from our referee immediately? So, the connection point, importantly, is just thinking about a moment in which you are going to take over the relationship with the prospect from your referee. You no longer need your referee. You are now in direct contact with that prospect.
Great. So if we use the Hamilton phrase, got to get in the room or want to be in the room, whatever that song was, what you're saying here is the referee's job is to get you in that room in inverted commas. What you're saying is the
Yep.
connection point is the activity or almost the justification, maybe for the face-to-face. So as you say,
Exactly.
so you've given a great example there of, so you create maybe a piece of insight and it's
Yeah,
either we're going to present this new piece of data or research to a room of 20 prospects or whatever it is, or we're going to find an activity to do something. So it could be an
exactly.
event, it could be a product, as you said, but essentially
Yeah.
it's the activity which puts you in the front seat with the client.
It heroes something of high perceived value to the
Yeah.
prospect. And the reason why that's important is it becomes our vehicle of value.
Yeah.
So get the connection point right. Now, there's two parts. There's the format of the connection point. Is it a dinner? Is it a
Yeah.
webinar? Is it this, that, the other? But there's also the reason for the connection point, which is the piece of insight that you've just surfaced there, which is spot on because the insight or the product, whatever the thing is that's the hero of this connection point, has to be the thing that makes our referee look and feel good for telling the prospect about. And it has to trigger one of the three emotional triggers of acceptance in our prospect. Now, those three triggers are either appeals to my reputation, my profile. Yes, I really want to be a part of this. It appeals to the desire for mastery in me. I'm going to go and I'm going to learn something that is really valuable to me personally or in my role. So I need to go. Or it's FOMO. It's look who else is going. I need to be in that room. So if we can tick 1, 2, or 3 of those emotional trigger boxes, then we are going to make the referee look and feel good. And we're going to get the prospect to lean forward and willingly accept that introduction.
Sorry, sure. I was just going to say, if you think of what the alternative to when there's an absence of a connection point, right? You go ask for that referral and you get connected in. 9 times out of 10, we find agencies rock up to a meeting like that with something like a cred deck.
Yeah.
Right? And it is, clients tell us, it is exhausting. You do not want to see another cred deck that, frankly, they could have gone on your website in a few minutes, right? What Katie Bullock spoke about this in her talk at Bulletproof. It's like you talk about yourself for 20 minutes, and then it's got what we call the awkward record scratch moment where it goes, so then, is there anything that you think we can help you with? Nobody wants that meeting. You'll get some platitudes at best. That's lovely, that work. We'll be sure to bear you in mind. No one ever calls, right? So actually what a connection point is, and that is why your team feel awkward and icky about it. And it's actually why your language, if you've not got a connection point, is apologetic. It's, oh, we'd love to speak to John. I see you know John. We'd love to speak to them, show you some work that we've done in their space. No one wants that meeting. So a connection point, as Claire says, really signals the value to the referee, but really still signals the value to that prospect as well.
That's interesting, mate. And it's concept of value, because I think one of the things that hold people back from maybe having that brainstorm about, who could we find in our network is that point of holding back from, oh my God, what are they going to ask them? No, God, if I get Stuart in front of them, what's he going to embarrass me with? I suppose there's that side, but also, as you say, that what's in it for the referee, I think that's something that gets missed very often. We spoke to, when I was just said earlier, we had a reason to speak to an existing client just last week on this, and it was an absolute fantastic opportunity they've got where the best example of their value proposition exists in a client, and because that client is quite controlling, and I mean in a pleasant way, they will never do case studies. They're very, look, what you do for us is brilliant, but what we're doing, we're keeping to ourselves. And it was a member of that team, a fairly junior member of that team, who'd left and gone to a competitor who said, we used Agency X to do this. Yeah. And it was interesting that it was that, well, what's in it for that person? And I asked, what have you done? How do you follow up? You did go back and say thank you, didn't you? And 3 people in the room all went like that. Who did that? It maybe comes back to your point. They were so keen to jump on the opportunity, nobody taken the time to consider what was in it for the referee. And I know obviously when you spoke about, some organisations choose to have financial incentives, some people do other things. But I think your point of the clever scheme would be the bit about, as you say, the mastery, the what does it do, how does it help them enhance their reputation? Because that concept of value is not always, I'll get you some tickets to the next England game or whatever, is it?
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, the point you just raised there about people sort of pointing in everyone's direction about who was it that thanked the referee is such a massive point. And actually, you can go through all of these really sort of creative and the intentional steps that we lay out within the system. But actually, the one dot, if you don't join it at the end, which is how to keep your referee close,
Yeah.
how to keep them up to date with where you're up to with their prospect. Now, not in a way that needs anything from them. You're not sort of burning their time up going, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? What you're saying is, just so you know, I'm having lunch with them on Tuesday. I'll let you know how I get on next week. Lunch went really well. We're on to the next stage. I'll let you know when it moves on. By the way, we've got our first brief. Thank you so much. I owe you lunch. There's a bottle of wine in the post, whatever it might be. Now, you might have a bit more of a formalized incentive structure, which is great. Still don't forget the nurture process. But if you haven't got the formal incentive structure, I spoke about a bulletproof. There's three sort of forms of reward. There's gifting, growth, and gratitude. And actually, the gifting one, which is a very personalized, they love golf.
Yeah.
So get them a golf and spa day pass. Just hold them close, care about what they care about, keep them up to date, and reward them in a way that actually is as personalized as you can get. Clients are slightly different. You might have anti-bribery rules, you might have sort of tread on eggshells a little bit, but when you think about personal contacts and you think about partners that are referees, really think about how can I just nudge them even closer to me, because the level of advocacy that they show will go right up. You can turn a referee into a super connector just by keeping them close.
So connection point is activity, but connector is the potential referee or pool of referees. So I'm assuming you're going to tell me a super connector is a referee who would act on your behalf again and again and again.
Yeah, exactly that.
So
We have a bit of a criteria for how to spot a super connector in a sea of referees, right? Because some referees, you might only get one connection out of them, which is brilliant, and own it and take it and all of that. But those that can really become super connectors, they tend to be people who have a decent profile within your ideal client profile world, so they've got the ear of lots of decision makers, they have a decent authority voice, but importantly, they've probably referred you once or twice in the past, and you might just have missed the opportunity to nurture them into proper advocacy. So yeah, really think about that. Who is it we know that has got the ears of the people that we really want to know? They've got a loud voice in that space, whether that's on LinkedIn, whether that is a live event, whatever it might be. They've got a voice that is authoritative, and therefore we can trade off that voice because the trust will be there as well. But how do we sort of utilize their platform as our platform? And yeah, those people that have maybe referred us before, what if we brought them closer? Could they do it more times? And ideally, it's 3 or 4 times a year at least from a super connector.
makes sense. These things we tend for about an hour. I'm conscious that the time we're getting to at the moment. So I want to maybe help people, or with your help people understand why this matters. So we said that piece that said so many agencies get excited at pitching for work that they've already lost. Some of that is potentially about your concept of identity. We are happy when we are pitching. We're not selling when we're pitching, but we know we're in a competitive situation or whatever it is. Lou and I took a course of action that said we will not pitch because of working out what it costs and everything else. And by the time I'm a big believer, by the way, I'm probably one of the few people that have owned agencies that don't want a brief, because by the time you've got the brief, in my experience, very often decisions have been made. You said something in your keynote speech that I think is really important, and this is why not people in my experience, people use referrals as that's a bit of icing on the cake. But you were quite, I'm going to use the word brazen on this to say, well, actually, this might be, as you said, the most efficient way of doing it. And you gave an example of what you called your 95-5 rule, which was really interesting. Help just explain that one briefly and why most agencies spend time, effort, money, emotion in the wrong part of their maybe prospect cycle, as I would describe it.
Okay, so 95-5 rule, many of your listeners may have picked up on this piece of research from LinkedIn and Harvard Business Review, but 95% of the market is not in market for your services at any one time. They don't have a brief. They're not looking for a new agency. So what it means, and what we find people's efforts are concentrated on, is the 5%. Everyone's essentially sort of elbows out, trying to out-hustle each other to get in there just as that brief is about to drop. That's a really crowded, competitive, price-sensitive kind of space. Now, what a good referral system should allow you to do is actually speak to prospects when they are out of market, which is much less competitive. And the reason you want to do that, to your sort of point before, Stuart, is that there's something called the day one list. And it's another Harvard Business Review piece. And ultimately, what that showed was that 86% of the time, a buying process is started in B2B with a day one list. They will write down the names of the agencies in this case that they think they'd like to work with. Now, on average, that is less than 3. You think about the length of pitch lists that get assembled at the start, you may have made the pitch list, but you've not made the day one list. Many, many cases, right? What we get so excited about, it's almost like the currency that is spoken about around the board table. Oh, well, let's put that up on, we're pitching for, I don't know who it might be, Superdrug or whatever else. That feels good, doesn't it? Great to tell our team about, we're pitching for this. Great to tell our peers around over a beer. But as you say, and the final stat is the killer, 86% of the time, the winner is chosen from that initial day one list. So you've ultimately earned not only a lot of bottom line, but if you do that enough times, you kill your team's morale when it comes to the actual pitching. The point of back to 95 and 5 is actually if we can begin through a referral system to get on the inside of the business ahead of that day one list, then that's a really smart investment of our time. Feels somewhat counterintuitive to some people because they go, oh, well, that's just why we're doing social media and, content, and it's about marketing visibility. Well, it's not. It's a job for sales.
I've said in the past that very often everyone believes that their industry is unique when most times it's not. The same problems exist. Something that I do believe is inherently damaging and dangerous in the agency space is this predication on the be-all and end-all is the brief. Oh, it starts and ends with the brief. And I used to argue exactly that. And I wouldn't have used the phrase day one list, but it's the same thing. If we were a UX design agency and we were on a roster for a very well-known British international brand, and they started life off with a couple of agencies. They grew to 9 agencies on that roster. And for the first time in the last year before we sold that business, they'd gone outside of the UK. So it was a genuine international roster. And we were rightly very proud that we'd been awarded it for a third time, longest standing agency on the roster. And I asked the question of the client service team, why? Why were we on that roster? What was our point of difference, etc.? And we took time with the client. And what that client had done is they had actually, forget what we thought our value proposition was. They had taken 9 problems and they had assigned an agency to a problem. So if it was branding, it was agency 1. If it was, in our case, UX, if the problem is this niche, it goes to those guys. And they made me realize that exact point of, because they were then getting to a point that they were having to justify spend, as often people do. And we learned that very often certain things could just be given. And some cases you knew you'd be in with 2 or 3 others. But exactly that day one list essentially was the roster. They never went outside of that. And that's something that I think too many people, when I speak to them, believe that, they've been invited to pitch as if that's already a win of some kind. I used to say to people, if you bring me a tender or if you bring me an RFP, I'm not interested. Because until you can get in the room before that's done, somebody's already done the wording in there will say, only respond to this if your middle name's Jeffrey or whatever it is. And your point there, what you're saying about that, and again, I've not seen it the way you describe it, but I understand it. The 595 is, what you're saying is, if we put all this round of a circle is, identify those prospects that you want to work with, that hopefully are in the 95, not the 5, because they're not on the lookout right now. You find people who've got connections in there. You create your, let's just use the word insight because we've used it for this. You create something of value.
Yep.
And then you design an activity or a way in which that piece of high perceived value could be presented to that person as a reason for them to talk to you. Don't wait until you're in the 5% because it's overcrowded. It's a race price at the bottom. Find ways to get in front of people that are in the 95. Work on your connectors. Work on your I'm going to use the word insight just because we've used it here, or your piece of value, your value proposition, your offering, if that's the right reason. Why should that person get in the room with you? And I think what we're saying is if you put those things together, you're not going to, let alone as much as you might enjoy it, you're not going to spend your life pitching for work. You might drop 1 in 3 and think you're doing well, but that's getting less and less and less these days.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So you're looking to get ahead of that day one list before it exists, right? If you can walk through a warm door with all that inherited trust Claire was talking about, come via that referee. If you can present that insight, then really critically, if you can, what we call a door opener product.
Yeah.
So actually, don't be too big to buy, or try and to force that thing. What you want to do is highlight the insight and give them a really small way that we can they can take that first step. Claire talks of get the first yes, which is the hardest yes. If we're working on the inside on even a small sort of project, that is far better than, often people go, oh, well, these were on the pitch list and they've actually downloaded a couple of our white papers or whatever in the past. You are so much in a stronger position to be on that genuine day one list if you've managed to get on the inside. Created the value in the connection point through the insight, and then if you can, begin working with them via a door opener product. But you're absolutely right.
Fascinating. I always say this, I invite people on this because when I've met you and when you've spoken, it's resonated. I am not of this industry other than I had 2 agencies, but most of my commercial career beforehand was outside of that. So I can evidence that all of these things matter and they matter for a reason, even if people think their agency is different, etc. So that's why I wanted you guys in. For those listening today that have resonated with this and recognize something and say, okay, I can see where either I've got my identity wrong or our team have got our identity wrong, or we want to understand more, how do we find super connectors? How do we investigate a referral system? How do they get in touch with you guys? What's the easiest route to speak to you?
Sure. Email us. We answer every email that comes in, and particularly if you stick Map Room in the subject line, we'll be able to push you right to the top. So yeah, you can email me on Claire, CLAIRE at crowflies.co.uk, or you can do Steve, Steve at crowflies.co.uk.
Excellent. Well, all that remains for me to say, as always, is thank you so much for your time. It's a fascinating subject. I would say it's potentially one of the most misunderstood and less utilized areas of business development that people can get their hands on. So I do appreciate you taking the time to help people understand it more. I hope it's been worthwhile listening, and I hope we'll see you again soon in the Map Room. Thanks and bye for now.
Thanks, Stuart.